Welcome back to our third and final session of our online fundraising webcon today. A quick reminder before we start and a bit of housekeeping for those joining us. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box in your questions panel. And if you have any questions throughout the sessions today, we really encourage you to type that in the questions box as well, and we'll answer those throughout the session too. We really encourage this to be an interactive session, so please do ask away as we go on with today's session. Quick reminder that the session is being recorded and a video and copy of the webinar slides will be emailed to you by the end of the week as well today. Now, for our last session today, we're going to hear from Stephen Malley, who is the Director of Fundraising Force, and he's going to talk to us about whether the perfect CRM really does exist, and if so, how to find it for your organisation. Stephen has 30 years of experience in the not-for-profit sector in the United States, Asia Pacific, and in Europe, and his combination of fundraising, management, and consulting experience allows him to easily identify his clients' needs and help them develop solutions to their challenges, which results in their ability to dramatically increase efficiencies in revenue. Now, I'm delighted to hand you over to Stephen to guide us all through the process of hopefully finding the right CRM for your not-for-profit. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Chloe. That sounds like a big task, but hopefully we'll get there today. Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming back. I realize that this is a commitment that you're all making in professional development and information sharing. So welcome back, and thank you for letting me be part of your day. I hope everybody out there is well and hunkered down and avoiding COVID-19 as best as possible. These are tough times, and technology is a big part of the times that we find ourselves in. So hopefully I'll be able to shed some light on finding that perfect solution for your organization. As Chloe said, I'm going to take questions along the way, so do ask questions. Let's make this interactive, and I'll save plenty of time at the end for questions. So if I don't cover something that you were hoping that I would cover, or you've got a burning question that comes up at the end, it won't be too late. We'll have plenty of time during the 90 minutes that we've got reserved. All right. So, just by way of introducing myself, my background, as Chloe said, is fundraising. So I have served as head of fundraising for a variety of organizations in the US, and those are mostly in the healthcare sector. So those of you who are in a hospital or a health organization, I've worked in a variety of those types of organizations, including disease-specific organizations and what have you. And so I've been in your seats and have very much enjoyed serving as a professional fundraiser. Many years ago, I received a phone call from one of the technology partners who we'll talk about today, Blackbaud, and went to work for them as a consultant and did that for 8 years, 1 in the US and 7 here in Sydney. And so I transitioned to the consulting side, and then after I left Blackbaud in 2014, I started this company called Fundraising Force. And Fundraising Force provides a wide variety of services to the nonprofit sector, both on the fundraising consulting side and also on the technology side. So we're, I like to say that we're a unique firm out there because we are a blend of fundraising and technology. Oftentimes in a not-for-profit organization, I think staff find it difficult on the fundraising side to communicate their requirements to those on the IT side. And likewise, IT professionals find it very difficult to understand what we do as fundraisers. And so we're a blend of that, that expertise as a partner to not-for-profit organizations across Asia Pacific and, as Chloe said, in Europe. One of the services that we do on the technology side is CRM search, and that's really what I'm going to talk about today, a 10-point process that we follow I'm not here to sell fundraising course to you. I'm actually here to offer you that process so that you could do it independently if you so desire. I think this process is easy enough for not-for-profit organizations to do, and I'm going to guide you through it and answer your questions along the way and hopefully make you comfortable that you could actually do this process if you've got the time and the energy to take it on yourself. We also oftentimes will stay on after doing that search and actually project manage the implementation. And I'll talk a little bit about the importance of having a project manager in your CRM implementation. It's something that's oftentimes overlooked, and I'll talk about why that is, shortly. We are product agnostic, so I'm going to talk about a lot of products today. I've just told you I used to work for Blackbaud. We've got a great relationship with Blackbaud and have a lot of respect for that company, but we also have respect for a lot of companies out there and their platforms and products. So we are completely agnostic. We don't care what platform you choose. We only care that you choose the perfect platform for your organization. And so know that I'm not here to represent any one of these platforms. As far as we're concerned, they're all fantastic and they all might suit your organization. And there's our Twitter handle up there on the screen, and I encourage you to follow us on Twitter. We're very active in social media. You'll find us on Facebook, you'll find us on LinkedIn, and that is our Twitter handle. I invite you to share your comments today throughout this webinar. It's not too early to jump on, follow us, and actually comment whether you agree or disagree with what I'm about to say to you. It's all good. So thank you in advance for following us and for sharing your thoughts. All right, so here's what I intend to cover today, and I hope this meets your requirements. I put together this agenda based on what we advertised that we would talk about, and also added a few other elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is define some key, I'm going to offer some key definitions to you because I think we oftentimes use terminology differently around the world. And we oftentimes use terminology different between the suppliers and those of us in the sector. And even within the sector, we use some of these terms interchangeably. So I'll talk about the difference between those. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the products that are available here in the Asia Pacific market, which is very different from what products are available stateside. And it's likewise different from what's available over in Europe. But I'll talk about what products are available here because that's what you and I care about. I'm going to talk about 6 common misconceptions about CRMs and about searches that oftentimes occur. I'll talk about who in your organization to involve, whether to cast your net wide across the organization or to conduct a very narrow search. And I'll talk about the pros and cons of that. I'm going to give you a 10-point CRM search process. I'll show you a couple of templates that we use in our business whenever we do a search for the types of organizations that are represented here today. And I'll talk about how those tools will be utilized. I'm then going to take you into what happens during the implementation of the CRM, and I'll talk to you about some lessons that we've learned along the way. And then I'm going to offer you some key takeaways. I hope I'll offer you some mistakes that have been made out there in the sector, and we can all learn from everybody's mistakes. Perhaps you've made some mistakes along the way, and you'll share those in the question window as well. All right, so that's our agenda for today. Let's get into the definitions, if that's okay. And I've got, I think 3 or 4 definitions to go through with you. The first is this term database. So oftentimes people will say, I'm the database manager. We use X product as our database. I think this term is the most simplistic of all the terms that I'm going to cover today. And I actually think this term cheapens what we do day in and day out. I don't think that this term should be used, and I don't think the products that I'm going to suggest that you look at today are products that should be considered to be a database. In fact, a database is very much similar to what we used to have years ago when we had a Rolodex on our desk. You know what? It stores somebody's name, their address, their phone number, today an email address, maybe the web address of an organization, maybe their social media handles, and nothing more than that. So you can imagine that there's a lot more that you want to track about your constituents, whether they're individuals and organizations. And so to suggest that we are building a database, to suggest that we track everything in just a database, I think really cheapens and limits what it is that we're looking to do. I also would look at this term called fundraising system. I think this term also limits and is quite limiting in tone. A fundraising system really just tracks the fundraising activity that happens. Many of you would be looking for a CRM that you could use across your organization, and that's much more than a fundraising system. There are some perfectly strong fundraising solutions that are out there in the market, but those organizations that hope to use the CRM for programmatic requirements and for some other requirements oftentimes find these fundraising solutions to be really problematic because the terminology used in these systems are all about fundraising. And therefore, the user adoption and the use cases that are outside of fundraising are really a challenge for those types of solutions. I think what we really want to talk about is this concept of a CRM, Constituent Relationship Management Solution. Doesn't that sound like a robust solution? So a CRM tracks not only who, so the individuals and the organizations, Stephen Malley, fundraising force, but it also tracks all of the revenue against those parties. It tracks all of the activities, the interactions. It would track the opportunities that you might have with that organization or that person. All of the fundraising pitches and other types of pitches, so-called opportunities that you would have with them. It really is a central single point of truth of all things throughout your organization. You would know in my record everything that you had ever sent to me, whether it's electronic, whether it's via post. You would know everything that I've responded to, how I responded to it. It's all roads should lead through that CRM. It's a central focal point for your organization. And as I said, many organizations are trying to find a solution that will work across the organization. And that's what I call an organization-wide CRM. So it's not just focused on fundraising activity, but it's programmatic activity. It's activity, throughout the organization. And so every single department would use that single CRM. That really sounds like utopia. Many organizations aim to get there and don't quite get there. Some organizations have that as an ambitious goal and are still working on it to this day. I'm just going to pause there, Chloe, and see if we've got any questions or comments about any of the definitions before I go on.
At this stage, no questions.
Okay, good. All right, I'll do that periodically just so the audience knows, because I want to make sure I'm moving at a healthy pace, but I also don't want to skip over something and have somebody confused. So I'll do that throughout the presentation. Great. All right, so you see this person at the bottom of the screen, and I think that that's oftentimes where we find ourselves frustrated. We find ourselves overwhelmed. A CRM search, is almost too big for many to handle. All of you have what I call day jobs. All of you have demands on your time. And so a process like this is an add-on, and the process that I'm about to go through, the 10 different steps, might just seem a little too overwhelming and you might be pulling your hair out. at the thought of taking this on. But I want to start out by talking to you about the products that are in the marketplace. We'll get to the process and hopefully simplify it for you. But let's look at the products that are available in the marketplace first. So my first statement up here, I think, is so true. They vary in shapes and sizes. Basically, there are two approaches. There are platforms, and then there are implementation partners of those platforms. So as I walk through these products, I'm going to pause and actually tell you whether or not the platform is implemented by the manufacturer of that platform, or if it's implemented by partners in the market. The difference between those two, is the following. There are some products out there, some platforms, that are only implemented by the company that makes that platform. And so, that would be like Coca-Cola. So Diet Coke is only made by Coca-Cola, and they distribute that out to the market. But there are platforms that are available in the market that are implemented by specialist partners out in the market, and those partners are certified by the manufacturer of those platforms to actually implement the software. There's a pro and a con with each of those. Some would argue that the manufacturer is best placed to implement their CRM. Others would argue that having many, many partners as specialists for that CRM is a fantastic model because it offers you choice and competition in the market. I don't have an opinion either way. What I think is most important is that you engage the best possible product with the best possible personnel to actually implement that software. In the Asia Pacific market, you've got lots of choice. It used to be that there were only one or two products available here. Today, we've got lots of choice. And as I said, they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. But I do admit the selection can be a bit overwhelming. And, with lots of choice, with a menu of options available, it can get a bit taxing. There's also some products that are highly, highly known in the market, and there are some that are best kept secrets. And, I'm happy to highlight which of those each of those categories. I think you'll know when I walk you through the products in just a second. All right, so let's look at some products. So in the market, there is, of course, IMIS. Many people will have heard of IMIS. It's been around for quite a while in the Asia Pacific market. In my opinion, that product started out as a membership system. So they sold that product into associations. So some of our peak bodies in fundraising actually used IMIS to manage memberships and things like that. IMIS is a product that has had what I would say is a facelift, and it's not the IMIS of years ago, and it's worth taking a look at. There's also a product called Thank You available here in Asia Pacific, and it too has had a facelift over the last several years. And the current version of Thank You does not look like the version that some of you might be familiar with because you may have used it previously over time. Microsoft Dynamics. So let me just pause here and say that IMIS and Thank You are primarily fundraising platforms. So I'll put them in that category. Microsoft Dynamics is not. Microsoft Dynamics has a nonprofit accelerator that has been released, maybe 18 months ago. And so that accelerator will do things like regular giving and will speak fundraising lingo. But there's this whole animal, this whole large CRM that exists around it that is very much a platform. So that's not a fundraising solution. Microsoft Dynamics, of course, integrates seamlessly with all of your Microsoft product, and you and I use lots of Microsoft product day in and day out, including Outlook and Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and things like that. And that's the real beauty of going with a platform, is that there's a lot of seamless integration. There's openness, open API, and so that software, that platform will talk to many different other platforms, other softwares in a more seamless way than perhaps some of the fundraising specific solutions that are in the market. Salesforce. So many of you will have heard about Salesforce and its nonprofit success pack. So about 8 years ago, the nonprofit success pack was released to the market. And if you looked at it then and you haven't looked at it since, it's not the same as it was 8 years ago. Thank goodness, because Salesforce has vastly improved the nonprofit success pack and have added a lot of features to it that were once lacking when it first came out. So like any piece of software, as it matures over time, it gets added on to, becomes best of breed, and the nonprofit success pack will do regular giving and lots of things that you and I need to do for fundraising and fundraising specific sort of things. So like Microsoft Dynamics, with Salesforce, we also have this large platform that can be used organization-wide. So it can meet the needs of your volunteers, it can meet the needs of your programmatic staff and things like that. There are many organizations in this sector that use Salesforce for programmatic stuff and use other solutions as well, and then they integrate those solutions. So that's Salesforce. And then we have the Blackbaud product. So the first here is called eTapestry, and it's been around for many, many years. It used to be a separate company, and Blackbaud acquired it. eTapestry is usually used for smaller organizations, sort of entry level. It's got quite a nice user interface. It's been updated over time. There are organizations that quite enjoy using that solution because it's quite intuitive. Also, Blackbaud have the Razor's Edge. Razor's Edge NXT is their latest iteration of the Razor's Edge. Like IMIS and Thank You, Razor's Edge has had a facelift, and the new interface NXT is quite intuitive, quite user-friendly. And the look and feel is quite exciting for those organizations that have used Razor's Edge over the years. And then their top-end product is called Blackbaud CRM, and that product would be largely used by universities and very large, global not-for-profit organizations. But nonetheless, I just wanted to highlight that it is available in this market. And then the last product that I'm putting on this screen is a product called Vega, and it's out of New Zealand. And that product is relatively new to the market. It's been in the market for a few years. It is one of the products that I would say is a bit of a hidden jewel, and one that organizations ought to look at. It integrates with lots of platforms, financial platforms and the like, and offers a variety of payment gateways and other built-in solutions around marketing and things like that. Let me just pause here for a moment and see if any questions, Chloe, have come in about the products that I've walked through here on this screen.
Yeah, I've got a question here. You showed some really great solutions there. Can you talk about those that might be ideal for smaller organizations? We've got quite a few smaller organizations on the line today.
Great question, and I figured as much. I figured we'd get that question given the attendee list, and I appreciate it. So for a smaller organization, I'm going to make a few recommendations, and this will show you how product agnostic we are. I would recommend that you look at IMIS, that you look at Thank You, that you look at Salesforce Nonprofit Success Pack, and that you look at eTapestry and perhaps the Razor's Edge on the Blackbaud side, and Viga. Now you notice I didn't circle a couple of options with that answer, and I'll tell you why. Microsoft Dynamics and Blackbaud CRM are really for the large end of the market. Universities, big organizations that need to have a solution that is highly flexible and usable across the organization. And that's really the target market for those two products. So for smaller organizations, I wouldn't look at those two products. A, they're big products, and B, they're probably not affordable. But I would look at all these others. And if you look at that, that just takes away two of these logos. The rest of this screen is available to you in this market. And I would look at them. I would look at those products and see whether or not A, they're a good fit for your requirements, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, and B, that they are affordable for your organization, which will be part of your search, of course. Budget's always a consideration. So whoever asked that question, I hope that that answered your question, and we can come back to revisit that, of course, at the end during the official Q&A section as well. Great, thank you for that question. Let me just talk about 6 common misconceptions. And some may say these are a bit of fairy tales in terms of their misconceptions. So the first is, I've got to rush, I've got to buy quickly, I need a CRM, I needed it yesterday. I don't think anybody should rush this process that I'm about to outline today. And I say that because there's the timeline is your timeline. It's not mine. It's not the suppliers that you're going to look at. It's not the platforms. It's your timeline. And if you spend several months doing this process, then so be it. I would do the process thoroughly and not rush to buy. Many of these suppliers will want you to make a decision and want you to make a decision quickly. And why is that? They've got sales numbers to meet just the way you and I have fundraising targets to meet. It doesn't mean you have to rush. Sometimes suppliers will say, if you let us know by the end of the month, we can discount it by another 15%. And my take on that is, that's not a reason to step up your timeline. Excuse me for one moment, I'm just going to. Thank you. So don't let the sales targets dictate how quickly you make a decision. I need to have everything available that this supplier offers. Don't buy everything. I think you and I overbuy technology in our personal lives. I've got every Apple product known to man. I've got an Apple Watch. I'm speaking to you through an iMac computer. Over here on the side, I've got an iPad. I've got a MacBook Pro. I've also got an iPhone. I happen to be quite loyal to Apple, but the fact of the matter is I probably use 60% of this technology. And the reason that I only use 60% is twofold. One, I might not know all the technology that is on these devices, but two, it came with that technology. I bought all of that. You don't have to do that with these CRM products. There'll be add-ons. Some people will call them bolt-ons, whatever the term is that's used. There'll be features, modules that they will offer you that will be optional. Don't buy it all at once. Grow into it. Find a solution that you can adapt and grow with over time. And when you need that module, when you need that bolt-on, that add-on, acquire it at that time. You don't need to buy it all day one and not use it until a year or two down the road. Buy it when you need it. Here's another misconception that product A is the only one available in the marketplace. I just showed you a screen full of logos of platforms and companies that are offering solutions to our sector, the nonprofit sector. It used to be that there was just one or two players in this market, but as the market grew, as we became more mature as nonprofit organizations and as a sector, more products came into the market. There'll be more products down the road that'll come into this market. It's becoming a very competitive space. So don't feel like the one supplier who's courting you is the only one that's available in this market. Product B is the best available. I've heard it's fantastic. My friends use it. And it's popular, so it must be the best. That's a misconception. What's best for organization, A out there doesn't mean that it's going to be the best solution for you. Pay attention to your individual requirements. If it turns out to be the best product out there, fantastic, but do your homework in order to make that determination. It must be good, X organization uses it, or all of these organizations in this particular user group that I go to, this special interest group that I attend, all these organizations use it, so it must be good. Well, that might be fact, but again, pay attention to your individualized requirements. Make that determination for yourself. Popularity doesn't necessarily mean it's the best suited CRM for your organization. Product C will work out of the box. So it used to be that software would work out of the box. We would go and acquire the software. It would be mailed to us. It would be on a CD-ROM. We would plug that into all of the various workstations around the office, load it, and be good to go. Gone are those days. These solutions that I've just shown you on a previous screen are highly configurable. Some of them are fully customizable for your organization. And so gone are the days that we had this term called out of the box. If anybody says that it will work out of the box, that's a major misconception. All right, I'm going to keep going through this slide and then I'll pause for any questions. So do think about your questions that you might have based on what I've said so far. So this slide is about who to involve in your search, who in your organization should be engaged to go through this journey with you or with you and any supplier that you might engage to run your search. So I would suggest involve a broad base of your staff. I wouldn't go at it alone. I wouldn't involve one other person in your organization. I would involve a broad base of staff. I would put together a selection committee. Some of you work for very small organizations, some of you for moderate-sized organizations. I think that you can involve a good selection of people across your organization in this search. Get the diverse opinions of a variety of personnel across your organization. I would consider staff at various levels. So don't just have the leaders of the organization involved in your selection committee. Instead, I think this is a fantastic way to engage people who might be at other levels of the org chart in a process and get their opinion. Oftentimes, we overlook things that staff who are at a different level in the org chart will consider. And therefore, I think it's a fantastic way to engage them. Likewise, I think it is an opportunity for us to seek diverse opinions of others. I think it's a great way for us to manage change across the organization and gain buy-in from our colleagues who might be a bit hesitant to transition from one platform to a new platform. They might be a bit hesitant to be engaged, and it's a way to get buy-in across the organization. Chloe, I just said I was going to pause at the end of this slide. I just want to check in with you and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, around the who to involve in this search. Small organizations, is it important to involve everyone in the search, or should it be allocated to a specific person?
Yeah, I think you definitely want one person to lead it and facilitate it. In some cases, firms like Fundraising Force do that for organizations because they're a bit like the woman on the previous slide pulling her hair out with lots of documents to review, et cetera. So you don't want to go at it alone, but you definitely want to appoint somebody who's going to facilitate it. Oftentimes when we run the search for an organization, we do it in partnership with a key person in an organization. So I think that person needs to be appointed, whether you've got an external firm running this or you're running it yourself. You just want somebody identified on the inside who can help coordinate things and be the lead. In terms of small organizations, I get that you're really taxed. You're running a million different directions, and this will add to that level of stress, won't it? So I think what I would do is just, pare it down. And if you're a very small staff, let's imagine you're from an organization that has 1 to 5 staff people. Well, I would choose a cross section of them. And I might, if you're not the leader of the organization, I might consult with the director or the CEO of the organization about who to involve. Sometimes staff will seek the guidance of a board member and bring them into the process to gain buy-in from the board as well. Perhaps you've got a board member who has technology expertise and you'll want to involve them. So there's a number of ways to accomplish the goal. And just because you're a small organization doesn't mean you shouldn't cast that net widely and involve a broad base of staff and others in the process. I think you
That's
said that
great.
there was another
Yeah, there was
question.
another. Yeah, we've got another question from Claire. She's from a sort of entry-level organization, and at the moment they don't have a CRM at all. She's wondering if, in the meantime, while going through this process, is an Excel spreadsheet something that works in the first instance? Is that a good tool to then be able to merge that data with some of these more advanced CRM systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Claire, for the question. And I feel your pain, but you're exactly right. An Excel spreadsheet is just fine. Just a couple of thoughts about it. Try to only use one Excel spreadsheet if possible. And if you're going to use multiple spreadsheets for different purposes, try to make them uniform. The reason I say that, land your sites on a preferred CRM, the perfect CRM for your organization, you're going to want to make the migration of those spreadsheets into the new CRM very easy. And the key way to do that is to make sure that you minimize the number of Excel spreadsheets and that you also make sure that they're uniform between the spreadsheets. What I mean by that is, let's imagine that I am in 5 different spreadsheets within your organization. How about coming up with a unique identifier for Stephen Malley across all the spreadsheets? So you might have different spreadsheets for different purposes, but you know that constituent ID 70093 is my constituent ID, and against my name in all 5 spreadsheets is that unique identifier. Many organizations out there are using Excel spreadsheets in their early days, and that's fantastic. It would probably horrify you if I told you that the first nonprofit organization I worked for actually kept things in paper files. We didn't have, Excel. I'm going to make myself sound really old today, but we didn't have Excel at that point in time. And the best that we could do before we graduated to an Access database is actually paper. So gone are those headaches, and Excel is your best friend for the time being. So thank you for your question. I hope that helped. Any other questions, Claire, before I go on?
No, that's all at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so let's get into the process. I'm going to walk you through the 10 steps at first, and then I'm going to do a deep dive into them. So don't be concerned if I buzz through these first 2 slides of the 10-point CRM search process, I'm going to get into a lot of detail on each and every step and show you a few templates and those sorts of things. So bear with me as I get through these, these 10 points. So the first step is to gather the requirements of your organization. I would argue that this is probably the most important step. It's where you're going to gain an intimate understanding of what you need the CRM to offer on day one. And I'll talk to you about how you do that in greater detail coming up, but that is the single most important step, and it's step one. After you gather those requirements, you're going to do what we call market research. So you're going to say, okay, these are our requirements. What products out there in the market will actually meet these requirements, and who are the suppliers involved in those products? So let's imagine that you decide that the Razor's Edge or eTapestry from Blackbaud is one of those products. That's fantastic. Great. You'd put them on the list, and the suppliers involved in those 2 products are Blackbaud and Blackbaud only. So that would be probably a couple of entries on your supplier list. And then let's imagine that you decide, Salesforce looks kind of interesting, and it looks like it would meet our requirements. Fantastic. Put Salesforce down. But in the Salesforce space, you've got a network of supplier partners out there in Australia that implement for the nonprofit space. And you'd want to look at multiple, probably Salesforce suppliers to compare them against one another. So there comes into play our platforms and our partners in terms of the market research that you'll do, and I'll talk more about that coming up. Then you're going to send out invitations to those firms, and you're going to invite them to become part of your process. And I'll talk about how to do that and what to include with that invitation shortly. You're going to complete a request for proposals. And this is probably a Microsoft Word document, whereas the requirements in step 1 are an Excel document. The RFP is a Word document, a PDF of that document, but it's going to include a lot of detail, and I'll show you some samples coming up. Then once you release the packet to the market, you're going to conduct some one-on-one meetings with these suppliers, and that's both to offer your respect to those suppliers, but to make sure that they understand your organization and your requirements. And so that's an important step, and one that they'll enjoy and you'll enjoy, because it's really your first face-to-face dialogue with one another. So it's an important step. Step 6 would be your accepting proposals back from the suppliers, and I'll talk a bit about that process. And then we get to the demonstrations. So some say, oh, I've got to get demonstrations from the suppliers right away. That doesn't happen until quite late in this process, because you're not sure who, which suppliers that submit proposals to you, you're actually going to invite in to demonstrate. And I'll talk about the evaluation there, both of those steps coming up. And then ultimately, you're going to narrow it down to one platform and one supplier, and you'll start to negotiate. And I'll talk about some points about negotiation. Then you're going to select and actually sign an agreement with the supplier. And then ultimately, I think you're going to want to submit a business case to the board, because they need to approve the funding. And at that point in time, after you select and agree with the supplier, we need to get the funding probably before you sign the agreement from the board, and that's a business case. And we happen to have a template that we use for that we adjust for the given NFP, but it's an important step because obviously it leads to the approval from the board, your leadership in the board, and ultimately to the funding. Okay, so I'm going to get into the detail of all of those, starting with the requirements gathering. So, oftentimes we think that we know our organization well. Maybe some of you have worked for years for your organization. Maybe some of you have only recently started for your organization. this is an opportunity to either confirm that you really do know the ins and outs of your organization and you can put those to paper, or, gee, I don't know, but I've got to go find it out. And so this is a series of workshops that you'll run with your team members or a team member, where you'll actually ask them, what is it that we need the CRM to deliver for your business unit, your area of responsibility? So let me just narrow this down. Let's imagine that you meet with the person that handles events for your organization and you document everything from A to Z that they need the CRM to do. That might be that they need to set up each individual event as its own record in the CRM. That would be a requirement that you would document. You need to be able to fully describe each and every requirement to the supplier, because you're going to ask them to not only tell you that they can meet this requirement, but you're going to ask them, what will it cost to do all of these things? You're going to have to document these requirements. It's typically in an Excel spreadsheet, and I'll show you a sample in a second. And you're also going to need to be able to fully document what data elements you're expecting them to, to convert from your old system. Maybe that's an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe you're changing from Razor's Edge to Salesforce or Salesforce to Razor's Edge. What data elements are you expecting them to convert over to your new CRM? So you want to take an inventory of your data and document that as well. This is an example of just 2 rows of a functional requirements document, but I just want to walk you through this. I've taken this snippet and included it in the slides because I think you need to visualize what this product looks like that's going to be produced out of this requirements gathering exercise. So let me just walk you through it. This page, this sheet within this Excel document is for high value fundraising. So that might be major gifts, bequests, trusts and foundations, corporate partnerships, assuming that your organization is configured in such a way in your org chart. This particular Excel spreadsheet here documents each requirement row by row. You'll notice that I number the requirement. So each requirement has a dedicated number to it. And that's so that the supplier and I, or the supplier and the organization, can refer to that individual row easily. So they can say the requirement is HVM .1.1. You'll notice that the description is quite high level. It's not very detailed. But these suppliers should actually understand what that means. So if you say to them, we need to be able to track moves management in your CRM, they ought to understand. They've got expertise in our space, in our domain, so they ought to be able to understand what that means. Then you're going to tell them whether or not that requirement is essential or desired, and whether or not it's essential or desired. Does it need to be in phase 1 or a future phase, maybe phase 2 or 3 of your project? You'll notice next to that we offer them 4 choices. And those 4 choices are: this requirement can be met through configuration. They would put a tick there. This requirement can be met through customization. This requirement can be met, but through a third-party application, or we don't meet this requirement at all. We only allow them in our process to put a tick mark there. If they want to elaborate on it, so imagine that they put that it's a customization, but they want to tell us more about it, they do that in the response to the RFP in the narrative document, and they just say, regarding requirement HVM.1.1, here's an expansion, an explanation of how we meet that requirement. And that's fantastic. We ask them to only put a tick mark after the given choice here. And the reason is we want to add up how many of these are met through configuration versus customization versus a third-party app, or perhaps how many they don't meet at all. across the board, and we can best do that through a tally of those tick marks. So that is a sample of, our template that we use for requirements gathering. And I just thought I would offer that to you today. So sort of visualize what is it that we're doing by meeting with various team members to document these requirements and why. And there's an example of, what gets produced and why. All right, market research. So most of the time, you and I are not fully aware of what products are out there in the market, and we're certainly not. We might be aware of, some of these brand names, but maybe we're not fully aware of which of those brands and products meet our requirements. So that first step is vital in order to get to this next step. You can do a bit of this next step while you're doing the first step, but at the end of the day, it's important to make sure that you fully complete step one before moving on to this step. I do this through desktop research and relationships that we have with every single platform and supplier that's in this market. There are new suppliers coming into the market all the time, and so we're building those relationships over time. You probably won't have all of those relationships, so if you're going to go at this on your own, you'll have to do that desktop research and maybe make some initial phone calls and that sort of thing. I would draw the line when you place these phone calls, because once you make it known that you're considering searching for a CRM, you're probably going to get a number of follow-up phone calls. These are salespeople and they've got a product to sell, they've got targets to meet. So you're going to want to set some boundaries when you make those initial phone calls so that this doesn't become 5 full-time jobs for you. Step 3 is this request for proposal writing, and it's a written document that can be quite long. I think ours, I'll show you a sample, is probably a couple dozen pages, and I'll show you the sections that we typically include. You want to make sure that this is a companion document to your functional requirements in step 1. You're going to elaborate on some key points. And so let's imagine that the relationship that you have with the supplier is really important to your organization. Why? Maybe you've had some soured relationships in the past with some suppliers. Maybe you're not feeling like you've got a true partnership with your existing CRM supplier, and that's really vital to you. You're going to want to make that a section in your RFP document. Maybe the data you feel is very problematic, and you're going to want to cover that in this RFP. Perhaps there are some integrations that you require with your finance system or what have you. You're going to want to elaborate on those. So this is an opportunity to build on that functional requirements document. You don't want to write a novel. You want to really offer a high-level document, but you want to seek their responses against the various points that you've elaborated on. And so here is a sample RFP. I've blacked out the, or whited out the name of the organization that this is the RFP for. You'll notice that this is from the 14th of July. This document is very fresh and it's about to be released to the market. It's written for a hospital foundation here in Australia. And they're currently reviewing this document to see if I captured everything that we discussed in our requirements gathering sessions. But you'll see here that the document starts out with an executive summary, and that's really just introducing the process to the supplier. There's an about section where we tell a story about the charity itself. To make sure that they understand why we exist, what our mission is, and those sorts of things. Then there's a whole section 3 on what the process is, and we outline some key deadlines, some key dates, milestone dates in that section. We set some parameters in that section. In this case, we're leading the process, so all phone calls come through us. We're sort of a bridge between, a buffer between the charitable organization and the suppliers, and that's a key role for many organizations, including this one. We've got a statement about confidentiality. We have our business requirements documented. And then we go into some key points that we want them to respond to, starting with their firm background all the way through pricing. Just a commentary about pricing, it's never the final pricing. So whatever they respond with in their response to your RFP, it's just indicative pricing, and that's because they're only as good as the information that you're providing, which is generally not very detailed. And so we're just asking them for ballpark pricing to compare against their competitors. It will not be the final price that you'll pay for the platform and for their services. Another note on pricing, some of these platforms are free for the first 10 licenses. Salesforce happens to be one of those, whereas some of these are priced out per record that you have in the system, and they're banded pricing based on the number of records. Some are priced out based on the number of licenses, so the number of users that you have, whereas some could care less. If you have 1 million users, they only care about the content that you're adding, the volume that you're saving to the cloud. So pricing can be a bit all over the place and not exactly apples to apples, and you're going to want to weigh those models against one another. And then you'll see at the end there's some supplemental information. You can include anything that you want. This particular organization just wants their data inventory, so the counts of the different records that they're expecting to be migrated over to the new system. So that's an example of a RFP. It might look a bit overwhelming. Quite frankly, I'm giving you the categories that we include, and you're welcome to use this. You're going to get a copy of these slides and of course this recording, and feel free to duplicate some of this work if you appreciate it, or all of it if it's necessary. All right, point 4, the invitations. So you're going to invite the suppliers that you've researched and that you think are a good fit for your organization through a letter. And I send this letter out on email and invite them. And in there, I set some boundaries about the process. I give them a high-level timeline. And I also ask them to sign the organization's non-disclosure agreement or confidentiality agreement. That's really important. You're going to be opening your organization to the market, and you want them to sign a confidentiality agreement to make sure that they won't use your materials or disclose anything about your organization to other organizations in the future. So I will have them sign that non-disclosure agreement, that confidentiality agreement, and keep that on file for all time. And I would also only release your packet to those suppliers that sign that confidentiality agreement. We have a confidentiality agreement with all of the organizations we work with. They're quite standard agreements. These organizations are going to be used to signing these. Some of these suppliers may say, well, we've actually got one that's been vetted by our lawyers in America, or in Melbourne or Sydney, and would you sign our agreement? And most of the time our clients will sign the supplier's mutual NDA. So you can do it either way. I would just have an agreement in place and on file with these organizations. Step 5, so the response meetings. So these can be done in 2 different formats, and I'll talk to you about the 2 formats and the pros and cons. It's important that you offer some airtime to these suppliers so they receive your packet and you give them a week to review it, and then you say, we're available to conduct, to have a conversation with you about our process, about our organization, and also about our individualized requirements. And you're welcome to either book that meeting one-on-one with us, so that's one way to do these, one-on-one, or you can do a group session. All of the suppliers come to a meeting for 90 minutes together in a room, or maybe in this day and age on GoToMeeting. and meet together with you at the same time. Now, let me talk to you about the pros and cons of those. The positive of doing one session is that it saves you time and you don't have to do a bunch of 60 or 90-minute sessions. So that's a good thing. Saving time is never a bad thing. The negative about it is that it lets the cat out of the bag, so to speak. So you expose to all of these suppliers who their competitors are in your process. These suppliers certainly know their competition market-wide, but they don't necessarily know that you're looking at this other platform, which is implemented by this individual partner. And you might want to hold those cards close to your chest. Therefore, you'll opt for the one-on-one meetings. Either way, I think you must have a forum, either one-on-one or a group forum, for you to have a conversation with suppliers, have open communication with them, answer their questions, and make yourself available. Not every requirement is going to be crystal clear. They might want to ask you about the different angles of a requirement. They might want to ask you about certain details about your programs. You want them to have that information because information is key here, and we want them to be comfortable about our process, about our organization, and about our requirements. Item 6, the all-important proposals. So you're going to accept proposals by a certain deadline. What we do for the distribution of the packet and to accept documents back from suppliers is we set up individual folders on ShareFile, which is a fantastic file sharing piece of software. It's in the cloud. And it allows you to have security set up by supplier so they can only see their folder. And you're maintaining that confidentiality with the supplier. And at the same time, it allows you to share information back and forth. And you can get notification when documents are downloaded or uploaded to the individual folders. So we like to use that as a way to distribute information back and forth. There are other platforms out there that will do the same thing, but we use ShareFile because it's secure. It's a product by Citrix. Which I think is also GoToWebinar is probably a Citrix product, I'm not sure. So you want to accept those proposals by a set deadline. You want to evaluate the proposals, so your selection committee will receive an evaluation. My process is that we ask each individual to evaluate, so they review and score the proposals, and they do this in isolation. Why? Because we're going to have a group meeting. This is individual think before that group think. We want to know what Joe thinks versus Sarah versus Bob. And so we ask them to in isolation and not discuss them until we have We have a group meeting which lasts a couple of hours where we discuss our individual scores. We discuss different pros and cons about each product and each supplier and those sorts of things. And then ultimately we end up with a short list of who we're going to invite in for demonstrations. Those demonstrations are typically a few hours each. And why is that? We want to use the supplier time wisely. They prepare for these demonstrations. They individualize the demonstration for your organization. You want to be respectful, and you want to offer them a forum to not only pitch their company, but also pitch their product and show how that product is going to work ideally for your organization. You want to ask them to compare and contrast their firm, their product, their platform against others. You want to give them a chance to actually present their pitch to your selection committee in a very structured environment. Your selection committee will have an evaluation for the demonstrations. They will score the demonstrations. It's really important that you include that selection committee at each step of the way. So don't let people come in and fade out of your process. Instead, have the same group of people engaged throughout the process. I think the next point on this slide is vital. Don't create a circus for the supplier. So don't throw them curves in the demonstration that they won't be prepared for. That's not fair to them. And it's also not fair to your process. You won't have a good outcome. Remember, the supplier is investing in responding to your packet. They're investing in preparing for the demonstration, and they're starting to invest in a relationship with you. And so just be appreciative of that, and recognize that, yes, you are investing a lot of time in this, but you're also asking them to engage with you and invest time in your process. You might consider scripting demonstrations. So sometimes we will have different scenarios that they must show us in their software. Just a word of caution, don't let a supplier demonstrate against PowerPoint. You want to see whatever they're showing live in the software. If they come with screenshots in a PowerPoint and don't actually dive into the software, it might tell you that it's not fully built out and that there are bugs or issues in the software. So don't let anybody demonstrate with PowerPoint. Point 8, negotiation. So this is where I encourage you to really negotiate with suppliers. The list price that they're going to offer you is not their best price. There are certain times of the year that it's optimal to buy software. There are certain times of the year or certain times of the month that are optimal. Consider what other nonprofits have been able to negotiate with these suppliers. Talk with your colleagues, your networks. Really create a competitive environment. Play these suppliers against one another. They don't like me to say that to you, but at the end of the day, you know what? You might be looking at a Toyota and a Honda, and it's okay to let the Toyota dealer know that you're looking at other cars. It's okay to let the Honda dealer know that you just left the Toyota dealership, and the same is true with the software. You might not want to necessarily disclose which products and which suppliers you're looking at, but at the end of the day, it's okay to play them off of one another and to do that in that mysterious environment. Ultimately, this is going to lead you to a contract. You might not want to sign it yet until the board has approved of the project, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you review that contract and that you involve perhaps your pro bono lawyer in the review of that contract. That contract becomes quite vital. Ultimately, you're going to select a product and narrow it down and have a preferred product. You want to check references, and they're going to provide you, I hope, in the RFP document 3 references of projects that are most similar and organizations that are most similar to your organization. And you're going to want to check those referees. You're going to want to ask them questions and ask the same questions of the different referees. We've got questions that are stock questions that we use for that process. I'd be happy to share those. I would speak with their non-references. Employers do this when you and I apply for a job. They look in their network on LinkedIn and see who we've got in common, and they're not shy about contacting their colleagues that are not on your reference sheet to seek some guidance about whether or not you're the right candidate. Do the same with these suppliers. They're going to give you their 3 top customers. They're going to give you 3 customers that are going to say glowing things about them. You and I do that when we apply for a job and we include references. And so don't expect anything different from them. So talk to their non-references and also talk to their former customers. These suppliers gain and lose customers each and every year. Talk to the customers who used to use their services, their platform, and what have you, and seek information from them. And ultimately, remember that you're purchasing a relationship here. You're not purchasing buttonology. You're ultimately selecting a partner. You're selecting somebody that you resonate with, that you feel like really understand our market. They've got the best of breed product, and I can work with them. I can work with them for the next 7 years. Ultimately, you're engaging with this platform and this supplier for a 5 to 7 year time frame, maybe longer, and therefore you want to remember that it's about the relationship. The last point on here is the all-important business case. You want to write a solid business case that will ultimately go to leadership and to the board. In that business case, you want to review the process, the due diligence that you followed to get to the conclusion that you did. You want to include cost, the true cost of ownership. Remember that the cost of the implementation is only year one. And then years 2 forward, you're going to be paying either for licensing costs or that per record cost that depend upon the pricing model of the platform. So it's important for you to think through the costs that are ongoing as well. Maybe support is not included and you're going to need to have a support arrangement. So think through those things and really quiz the finalists about the true cost of ownership. You're also going to want to, in this business case, talk about the return on investment. That's really important. And so you're going to want to demonstrate, I hope, that ultimately the software will pay for itself through improved business processes, time savings, retention of donors, improved fundraising revenue, those sort of things. So ultimately, I hope years 3 forward, the product and the project is ultimately paid for through those efficiency gains and revenue gains. All right, I'm going to pause there and ask Chloe if there are any questions that have come in about the process that I've outlined. I'm getting down to the final slides, and so I just want to pause for a second.
Yeah, I have a question that's come through about the suppliers. So you mentioned obviously taking suppliers through this process. How willing are suppliers to actually go through this? Do they, if they're doing this for every potential client, does it not take a long time, or are they willing to and open to do it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. They're used to this. Do they love it? Maybe not. And you can scale the process, the 10 points, to meet your needs. But remember, you're driving the bus and you're seeking to find the perfect CRM for your organization based on those all important requirements in step 1. And after this bus reaches its destination and you sign on the dotted line, they're driving the bus. So you're kind of setting the tone for what that relationship's going to be like, what your expectations are, and if a supplier is unwilling to go through this process or an adaptation of it, shame on them, and perhaps they're not worth working with. So my short answer is they're used to it, and my real answer is I think it's necessary because you're vetting them, you're vetting the product, and you're vetting whether or not they are worthy of jumping into a marriage for 7 years and beyond. I just argue that it's a necessary process. Do you have to do every single thing in the way that fundraising for us do it? Absolutely not. We know that there are adaptations of this that work really well. And I think you need to scale it, particularly for the smaller organizations that are on this webinar today. Any other questions, Chloe, before I go on?
No, I think that's great. I'm conscious of time, so.
Good. Yeah, we'll save some time at the end for questions as well. Okay, so implementation. So you've signed on the dotted line and now we're off and running. We're in a relationship with this supplier and we've adopted their platform. The implementation can be the most painful part. What I've just outlined can be a bit of, an easy process compared to the implementation. And the reason that it's oftentimes painful is that you might not have a clear scope of work, or SOW. So make sure that you fully understand exactly what's included in the project and what's not included, and that both parties understand that, so that going into it, it's very transparent and your eyes are wide open. The implementation can be time consuming, there's no doubt about it. Larger organizations will spend 9 to 12 months or longer implementing their CRM. Smaller organizations tend to spend 2 to 4 months implementing the CRM. You want to engage a project manager to represent your organization, whether or not that's a person on your staff or that's a person that you bring in from the outside. Make sure that somebody has that responsibility to manage the project moving forward. All right, so just some final words here. So in terms of key takeaways, remember what I said, don't overbuy technology. We're all guilty of it in our personal lives. Don't fall into that trap for your organization. Acquire something that you can grow into. So implement this piece of it for go live, and then grow into it over time. Adapt the software to meet your needs. Make sure the software will grow with you and won't box you into some limits that you can't live within. Ensure that your organization is ready to adopt technology. Know what you're looking for, so gather those requirements and then go find it. The perfect CRM does exist for you. There's lots of fantastic product in this market. We're very lucky that we've got the technology platforms available to Australian organizations that we do. The important thing is to find the best match for you. You know, it's sort of like our personal lives. The perfect partner does exist out there. We just spend a long time looking for him or her, but the perfect partner does exist. And I say the same thing about technology. Understand your requirements front and center. Make sure that suppliers understand those requirements. Separate yourself from supplier influence. So I would say to you that having a third party run the process does that for you. If you can't engage a third party, maybe they're not affordable, or maybe you feel like you want to do everything in-house, just separate yourself from supplier influence. Remove conflicts of interest. Some of these suppliers will try to wine and dine you. They might try to send you gifts. They might try to take you to dinner, etc. Just really separate yourself for that so that you can run an objective process. Remember that you're not buying technology, but you're buying, you're acquiring that relationship. And if this is too burdensome for you, really try to bring in somebody to run this process for you. So in sum, you're going to gather these requirements, you're going to develop some search tools, you're going to involve suppliers at a certain point, and then ultimately you're going to implement that CRM. That slide there probably oversimplifies things, but that is a good summation of what I've laid out today. I'm going to pause now and see if any final questions have come in. I know that we're at about 18 minutes after the hour, but we've still got a few minutes, and I'd be happy to take on board any additional questions.
Yeah, you mentioned just then, Stephen, around sort of the process as a whole. Like, how long can an organization expect to take to search for the perfect CRM? What timeline are we sort of talking about here?
Yeah, great. Each search takes about 8 weeks to do. And I say that because we need to schedule our colleagues and be respectful that this is not their full-time job. And it might be your or mine, but it's not their full-time job. So we've got to be respectful of that fact. And we've also got to be respectful of the supplier schedules. You're not the only organization that they're dealing with. And therefore, they're going to weave you into their other prospective client commitments. So it takes about 8 weeks to do, to gather those requirements, to create the two important documents, conduct the market research, run those demonstrations, and conduct all the evaluations and what have you. So it's about an 8-week process, but it's an investment, and it's an investment that will pay multiple dividends, because if you get it right, then the implementation is a breeze. If you get it wrong, you're going to experience a lot of toothache throughout that implementation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. This is a long-term investment, and you wouldn't do that in your own personal life and jump in quickly with a long-term investment like that either.
I mean, think about real estate searches,
Yeah.
or this is the single biggest investment that your organization will likely make, with the possible exception of owning your office space or other real estate for programs or what have you. This is probably the single biggest investment that your organization is going to make. Therefore, I think about the fact I'm searching for a home right now. I'm not buying the first house that I see, even though it might be the perfect house. I'm comparing and contrasting neighborhoods and properties and the look and the feel and the flow of the property and things like that. And when you go to buy a car, the same thing. So this is the single biggest investment your charity is going to make, and it's important to invest time in that search.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned investment. I mean, what kind of budget ranges are we talking about in terms of these types of solutions? What's a starting figure or a top level figure for what we can expect to spend?
Yeah, that's another great question. So I would say that the products that I said that are more entry level. So let's take, eTapestry, Salesforce can be considered to be intro or advanced level. Maybe IMIS and Thank You. So those products that do cater to the smaller organizations, you can Viga. So you can probably acquire those products for the low thousands. Um, and some organizations spend tens of thousands on their CRM. So it depends upon your functional requirements. It depends upon how robust your programs are that you want to mold into the software. And it also depends upon the features that you buy with the software, the applications, or the different modules that you purchase. So I never like to answer a question with so many "it depends," but it does depend. And I would be, not doing my job if I didn't put those caveats out there. There are some dependencies to that answer.
Definitely, and I guess they are such tailorable systems now that it is quite varied based on your own requirements. So
Yes, that's
that
right.
makes sense. Yeah, and I guess Claire's asked a question, speaking of requirements, in terms of requirement gathering, do you have any sort of key questions that you use to bring out what is needed when you're asking
Yeah.
that question? Mm.
Yeah, Claire, thank you for the second question today. I do. So you want to get the conversation going with your colleagues. So I would start by asking them to give you an overview of their program area, their business unit, if you will, whatever you might call it. And that generally opens up other questions that you'll ask them. I don't go in with this scripted. And the reason I don't is I want them to be very relaxed conversations. You'll be surprised at how quickly people will open up and start to tell what they do day in and day out. Some people will bring written business procedures, and they'll actually have those documented. I mean, that's fantastic. Other people will just talk off the top of their mind, and that's okay too.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. Well, that's all the time we've got for questions today. Is there anything you would like to say to wrap up before I finish up with everyone?
No, my contact details are up on the screen, and I invite anybody to reach out to me on email or mobile, or we've got a contact us form on our website. And if you've got any questions, comments, want to seek some advice, or if you need our assistance, just reach out to us. Again, I'm not here to sell fundraising for us. I'm here to sell the fact that there is a perfect CRM out there for your organization. You just need to spend the time looking for it. And we're here to help you in any way, shape, or form. We've got blog posts on our website, which you might want to access and read more, when you've got the time. So thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. And thank you all for your time and the time that you've invested in this webinar.
Thank you, and thank you, Stephen, for so much in-depth information and for really guiding people through that process. It is a long process, but I think you've provided really great key steps for people along the way. So that's wonderful, and thank you for taking the time with us today as well. And
Thank
thank you everyone else for taking their time with us here at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Um, that this marks the conclusion of our online fundraising webcon for today, but hopefully it's not the end of your journey with us. We facilitate annual training calendars of online webinars, workshops, boot camps, and webcons to help the social sector in upskilling in all things digital. We've got some really interesting training coming up that might be interesting to those looking to continue to build your digital skills in fundraising. We've got a not-for-profit social media boot camp, which is happening at the end of July. And we also have a fundraising on Facebook workshop at the end of August. So check out the training and events page on our Connecting Up website if you're in Australia, and the TechSoup New Zealand website if you're in New Zealand. I'm now going to close this session, and that will be the end of our sessions today. As I mentioned, you will be taken to a survey regarding today's sessions with Stephen, and we'd really greatly appreciate you completing that as well. I'll be in touch within the week to send you through all of the recordings from today's sessions and follow up with you regarding a McPhee session as well that we missed out on today. So again, thank you for being with us today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening. Hope you stay safe wherever you are, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. And thank you, Stephen. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.